Hi guys. Okay, today we're going to begin going over some Shakespeare fun facts as we begin the unit of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. The Renaissance, which began in the 14th century, was marked by renewed interest in science, commerce, philosophy, and the arts. It is also referred to as the flowering of intellectual activity. Make sure you know these phrases. The Renaissance, which is equivalent to the 14th century, which is equivalent to the flowering of intellectual activity. During this time, Shakespeare was born, and he was born on April 23, 1564, in Stratford-upon-Avon during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Make sure you know this date that he was born. Make sure you know where he was born and under the ruling of whom. For your viewing pleasure, here is a picture of Shakespeare's house. When William Shakespeare was 18, he fell in love with Anne Hathaway. Which Anne Hathaway do you think he fell in love with? Nope, it's not that hottie. It's that hottie. Woo-hoo! So how did Shakespeare ever become involved in the theater? Well, there were not a lot of entertainment options at this point. There was no shopping, there were no cell phones, there were no computers, and there weren't any movie theaters. So good golly, what do you think he did? You should know that books were not even in wide circulation, so Shakespeare had the brilliant idea of becoming an actor, a writer, and a shareholder. Here's a great question. What three ways was Shakespeare involved in the theater? He was an actor, a writer, and a shareholder. Okay, what was the most famous theater during Shakespeare's day and age? It was what was called the Globe. This was an open-air theater that had livestock sales, screaming street hawkers, ubiquitous drunks. Think of it as the concert of today's day and age. This is the outside of the theater. This would be the stage that they would perform on. And this is a great photo because it shows the inside of it. Notice it's open air. Notice you have the balcony. That's actually where the rich folks would sit. On the bottom, you would have the cheap seats. That is kind of the opposite of today's society at concerts. Typically, the floor seats these days are the most expensive ones. So besides the Globe Theater, which Shakespeare performed in, there were other theatrical companies. The first one, under the ruling of Queen Elizabeth, was called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Shakespeare was actually a part owner of this company. Make sure you know Lord Chamberlain's Men. Eventually, Queen Elizabeth came out of power, and here came King James. He became the new sponsor of the Shakespeare's theatrical group, but he didn't like Lord Chamberlain's Men, so he changed it to become the King's Men. Since the theaters of Shakespeare's day are very different than from today, Shakespeare had to rely on electrifying words and images as well as concepts that would make the common folk stop in their tracks. Otherwise, they would be completely bored. You should know that many of Shakespeare's rhymes people use today as well, such as to be or not to be. That is the question. So Romeo and Juliet came about between 1594 and 1596 by William Shakespeare, but it is very important for you to know that he was not the original writer of this play. Shakespeare actually adapted it off of Arthur Brooks's narrative, The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet. That was written in 1562. These are some critical pieces of information you should know. But even more so, Brooks's version was an adaptation of a still older folktale and was Shakespeare's primary inspiration. As I previously mentioned, Shakespeare altered previous versions of Romeo and Juliet to create his own unique version. For example, the original version was 9 months in length. He condensed it to 5 days, so it happens very rapidly. He decreased Juliet's age from the original 16 down to 13 for more of a shock factor, and he increased the roles of minor characters such as Mercutio and the nurse to allow for better understanding of the characters. Make sure you are aware of these changes. Here's something interesting. Did you know that all of the women's roles were played by boys? Because women were not allowed to act in the theater until 1660. Make sure you know this information. As every road to success must come to an end, in 1611 Shakespeare retired permanently to Stratford. He did earn the status of gentleman, which was considered quite an honor during that day. I would say it even is quite an honor in these days. Shakespeare dies April 23rd, 1616. He was 52 years young. Anybody see anything ironic about this date, April 23rd, 1616? You got it. Shakespeare was born and he died on the exact same day. Make sure you know the dates of his birth through death. April 23rd, 1564 to April 23rd, 1616. Here's something fun. Shakespeare's tombstone reads, "Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he who moves my bones." So piece of advice, don't mess with Shakespeare's bones. So you know, Shakespeare is the most filmed author ever. There are actually more than 420 feature-length film versions based off of his work. Let's see if you know any of them. Taming of the Shrew inspired a movie such as Kiss Me Kate back in 1948. I'm sure you're not aware of that one because you guys are so young. Taming of the Shrew also inspired the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. And although this was probably before you guys as well, this is a very popular movie. Next, A Midsummer Night's Dream has inspired movies such as Get Over It from 2001. Othello in 2001 inspired O. And one of his most famous, Hamlet, inspired movies such as The Lion King from 1994. And then Twelfth Night has inspired movies such as She's the Man from 2006. Another great movie. One of the most famous, Romeo and Juliet, has inspired West Side Story from 1961. And then if you take a look at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see that Romeo and Juliet has also inspired 3 versions of Romeo and Juliet from 1968, 1996, and 2013, and then the wonderfully funny Nomeo and Juliet from 2011.